Welcome, Red Eyes members. We are talking with Edmund Marraige about the Anunnaki, the Karsag location. That's the possible place for the Garden of Eden. We're going to talk more about this later on here in this second part. But I'd like to begin to talk about something that we briefly got into here in the first hour, at the end of the first hour, regarding some of the research of Peter Kedrowan Taylor and about his discoveries or research, at least, around surrounding the magnetic fields of the sun and the earth, and the possible that this could have something to do with the alignment of 2012 as well, the galactic alignment, and that this might actually affect our climate in another way. Many people now, of course, are talking about global warming. We're also kind of dissecting the mythology around the global warming at the same time, and more as more and more research comes to light, we discovered that this is a fraud, basically, to run global politics through. They're setting it up as a big global threat, and everyone needs to join hands, and they can steer us in either way they want here, unfortunately, with this threat of global warming. But Edmund, tell us a little bit about Peter and what he's been researching. He's primarily then looking into global cooling as the next thing. Is that it, or where is he coming from?
Yes, Peter gave us an excellent lecture, which is on the Golden Age Project website. And so you can look at his first lecture and draw your own conclusions on his knowledge and skill. But he spent his life as a scientist, and I believe that he can be termed as a leading environmental scientist. He first became involved with the pollution of the oceans and also the issues about nuclear waste, and did very valuable work on that. I found that I went to one of his talks on the issue of global warming, and I found that his views agree with mine. I've been solid for about 6 years since I went to an environmental conference in England at Taunton, and made the point that, which I haven't had to change, is that the sun is so powerful and such a big influence that it was crazy to think that man really is making much difference, or that CO2 is a major greenhouse gas which is influenced also by man. And in addition to that, my point then, 6 years ago, was that even if we could do something about our climate, we couldn't afford to do it. And therefore the whole thesis of spending vast sums of taxpayers' money, remember, on trying to do something about fossil fuels and global warming and CO2, as much as we need to be much more efficient with our energy and to allow for the fact that oil won't last forever, we do need to take actions, but we don't need to scare everybody to death, tax everybody to the hilt, invent carbon markets which don't exactly do the job they're supposed to do and may well fail completely. On the basis that CO2 is something very bad that we are responsible for. Most interestingly, I find that people growing crops in greenhouses, even in Japan, I think, where large steel manufacturers have had to close down and have changed their workshops over to growing lettuces. No. One of the things that we find is that if our plants are going to grow fast to feed us, then we have to pump in CO2 into those greenhouse environments, because that's what plants love. The kind of fires we've seen in Australia this last year, the kind of peat bog fires in Indonesia, have contributed massive quantities of CO2 to the atmosphere, dwarfing the output of man. And we need to be sensible and also listen to both points of view. Our BBC reported on the Copenhagen meeting, which all they seemed to say was that sea levels are going to rise dramatically, which was extrapolating short-term trends based on a single sea level instrument in Hong Kong Harbour, I'm told, which was not reliable. Yet the really important conference in New York, which dealt with the alternative view, simply wasn't even reported.
Yeah.
And that seems to me to be just unforgivable that people can be so politically driven and inspired. And I know from my own lobbying of government in this country that if you don't say what they want you to say, then you're sidelined. There isn't a debate.
That's right, and they do it by the aid of exclusion of their, of certain information in order to steer, well, the agenda, the geopolitical global agenda that is running on, and this global warming threat has served them very well, and I think it will continue to do so as long as people are not smart enough to analyze it and criticize it. Yet at the same time, they're talking about the unity that every scientist agree, yada yada yada, in the media, but that's not true either. There's so many people who are intelligence have managed to dissect the whole the whole threat that they're talking about, and that it's simply not there. It doesn't jive at all. And what you talk about as well with CO2 levels, that frightened me on another level, because if we specifically look at plant life, if we look at how we are provided oxygen with that is through the aid of CO2, and if we start cutting back on that, and even I don't know what they're going to do next. Of course, they cannot possibly even begin to compete with a volcanic eruption, the amount of CO2 that is released from that. So nothing compared to it if we compare it to what we put out when we drive our cars, or the industry that we have. It's nothing compared to that. But do you think that there could be some kind of could this actually be affecting our plants in some way, our obviously the planet, but the way we grow food and so forth, that the climate or that even the plants have how should I call it? It has begun to take advantage of the situation that it's in. But now when we're cutting back on that, could that have some kind of effect, or this whole deal with the anthropogenic, meaning human-created global warming? Do you think that's all bunk and we have nothing to do on it?
I think there are minor effects, and that's what people hang their hats on. And what we're putting together is a whole load of researchers who have all climbed into individual boxes, are not looking across the top of the boxes and dealing with it in a multidisciplinary way. And that's why Peter Kedron-Taylor's lecture on my website is so good, because it explains so many different factors affect climate. And also that the first and most important lie was to suggest that CO2 in fact led temperature, when it was quite clear that temperature moved first and CO2 followed.
Yes.
I've got a wonderful chart which shows that when we're looking about the earliest agriculture all around the world, following this global catastrophe and so-called ice age, CO2 levels were very, very low. And it was only when those CO2 levels began to rise sufficiently that we began to get the big expansion of agricultural produce. That's a lesson from history. We also know, too, that we were something like 2 degrees centigrade warmer at the time of Stonehenge in England, and also with double the rainfall on the Marlborough Downs and Marlborough Plain, on which many of those ancient structures like Avebury and the earlier farmers had occupied. And so to say that we have never been hotter is another big lie. There have been 2 very warm periods, which we call the Holocene climatic optimum, the second of which was peaked at around 4,200 BC. And this is where we see a massive expansion of people and colonization around the world, simply because everything had been so successful in terms of food production and population increase. And the city-states were rather like eggs dividing. The young king who qualified for the job would take a group of people, craftsmen, say 200 craftsmen and their families, and go off and start another city-state somewhere else. And much of that involved going abroad to colonize unknown territory. And so we see this massive expansion of the Indo-European peoples all around the globe, around about from this period of 4,200 BC, which was a climatic optimum, much warmer than it is now, has been in the last 50 years.
And was much better to grow food at that point as well. People have even talked the higher amounts of oxygen in the atmosphere created a better environment and even a healthier human being. Do you think that could have been the case as well?
My clear view is that although the hunter-gatherer lived on his wits and must have been much sharper and brighter than us because he had to bring that food in every day to his family, we probably got a little lazier when we had agriculture. But on the other hand, the agriculture was such an incredible gift, which really enabled people to settle, become sedentary, as they say, and to be able to develop the arts and crafts and civilization as we know it. And I believe that our Anunnaki, our ancestors, were obsessed with diet, a wide and varied diet. And can see this in the records. And they understood just how important diet was. And I believe there was a great deal of sophistication within those city-state societies. And that's why they were so successful for so long, with such vigorous people and such incredible crafts and trade, and peace and peaceful times.
Do you think they lived longer, or any other differences compared to what we have today?
Well, there are varying amounts of research, and we've gone through good times and bad times. And in the bad times, clearly people were not eating the right food, or was relying on one crop. For example, like potatoes in the 1750s and the 1850s, there were two big potato famines. People always remember the second one. But I think that the way in which different societies thrived and prospered, we actually see an awful lot of problems from this time of 2350 BC, because we have major catastrophes which must have caused all sorts of problems for people. 2100, 1800 BC, 1650 BC. We actually have had a lot of what I call cyclical or episodic cometary problems between 2350 and about 500 AD. We've been very lucky since 500 AD, when the Romans left Britain, and things got so bad they stopped minting currency. And the occupants of the town of Cirencester, which now is about 17,000 people and was up to 10,000 people in Roman times, just in a very short space of time, the people had died, and the survivors had simply fortified the amphitheater. So a few hundred people were just the survivors of a town of 10,000 people. That was around about this figure of 500 AD. And so we've had problems like Tugunska, which is said to be a centennial risk by people like Professor Victor Klug. We actually had a Tugunska-type object within 50,000 miles of the planet about 6 weeks ago, which we wouldn't have been able to do anything about. If it had come down over any populated area, it would have been the biggest catastrophe of all time. If Tugunska had happened over Belgium, it would have killed everybody in Belgium. And so the astrophysicists have long been saying that we've had good times, but we're now going through an arm of the galaxy where there is a much higher risk of this kind of cometary debris, which is just simply repeating problems we had in the past. So good times, we eat well, we live long. Bad times, we die very suddenly and quickly. Crops fail, and we have an awful lot of people starving to death. Now, that was before we had this population explosion. So if we have history repeats itself with populations of 6, 7, 8 or 9 billion people, then we've got really serious problems to contend with.
And when you're saying